I began with photography very early in my life. My father was an art teacher, an artist, graphic designer, taught at the High School of Art and Design in New York. Gave me my first camera when I was about 8 years old. It was a Kodak Instamatic, which I still have. My grandfather was a photo retoucher for the New York Times. So photography goes way back in my family. In the late 1990s, early 2000s, a friend of mine recommended that I take a wet plate collodion tintype workshop. And in that workshop, the cameras that were being used were the cameras of the period of wet plate collodion, which was basically mid to late 19th century, and they were using Petzval lenses. And one of the most interesting things about how the lenses were being used in that workshop where they were using the complete field, and we were getting magnificent fall off, and we were getting swirly bokeh and all these sorts of things. I was very fascinated with the idea that you were getting different effects and different looks from the lens optically than you would generally get from a 35mm or medium format. And I was fascinated by the idea of having a different kind of look optically than was primarily, even to this day, is almost more preferred. The world is a sharp, sharp, sharp place. Photography, people want sharp, they want contrast, they want saturation, they want perfection. The Petzval is sort of the opposite of that in many respects. It is sharp, but it can also be soft. You can have all these different contrasting effects that can be used together very artistically and for expression. And that came out especially when I was learning wet plate collodion photography. And that's what got me interested in the Petzval lens. I was always collecting, and when I learned about Petzval lenses and learning about the different optical qualities and effects of it, of course I started looking for other types of lenses as well. So the Petzval and with wet plate collodion photography sort of sparked in me the interest in other types of lenses of that period and later. So I started collecting Petzval lenses, and I got into soft focus lenses. When I started collecting about 10, 15 years ago, there wasn't much interest in these lenses. I would go to the flea market and there'd be a pile of lenses. They'd be $5, $10, $15, $20, $100. That was unheard of, to spend $100 on a huge brass lens. There was this idea that with digital coming along, that film photography, emulsion-based photography, especially 19th century photography, was completely obsolete, and nobody cared about it. Then I started becoming interested in primary source material, lens catalogs, and I have a very large lens catalog collection, and that led me to look at the development of the photographic lens, of which the Petzval is one of the earliest. But then, once you have one particular design or formula that has certain perfections, we may like those perfections now. Back then in the 19th century, they didn't, so they were trying to design out those perfections. And there begins the development of the photographic and the camera lens. And so by late 19th century, early 20th century, you had lenses which harken in the modern era of the kind of lenses we have now, which are the sharp, flat field, high contrast lenses that, at this point, the look of all these lenses is very similar and very the same. So any lens you put on a digital camera, really from the 1980s up to the present, or the 1970s up to the present, is really basically the same look. The Petzval lens is very interesting because it's bringing you back to a period where these things are uncorrected and we're exploiting the imperfections and we're applauding them and we're using them in ways to give us expression that's different than modern lenses provide. The thing about the Petzval lens is that it's many lenses in one. It's not one lens. And that's true of basically all photographic lenses. If you shoot a lens wide open, you get a certain effect because of the shallow depth of field. If you stop it down, it takes care of, and whenever you stop a lens down, you take care of a lot of problems. You take care of the aberration, so to speak. But modern lenses, basically have a limit to how they're going to appear or look because they're flat field, they're sharp across the entire plane. You could get out of focus areas, but the Petzval has got all these different optical qualities that are going on that you can either keep or avoid. And that's what makes it interesting. So the Petzval has a curved field, it's called the Petzval effect. And in order to get the lens as fast as Joseph Petzval got it, he couldn't avoid at that time the curved field. Now, back in the 19th century, they would use a lens that would cover much more than the lens was used for, because the curved field created this sweet spot in the lens that was sharp. They would only use that sharp center. So a lens that can cover, say, 8 by 10, they would only use for 5 by 7. We discovered that we liked the area outside of that sharp spot. That's where all the swirly bokeh and the interesting things happen. So that's how we use it today. And it's because of that curved field that you get that swirly bokeh. The curved field is taking especially highlight. So the way to think of a Petzval is that when you have a background that is varied with highlights and shadows, like leaves with sun coming through the leaves, that's going to show the Petzval effect the most, because that swirl, that curved field, is going to act and really show or highlight the swirl in that situation. And the way to accomplish that is to have a subject at a certain distance to the background that you can focus on for sharpness, but the varied background is far enough away so it's out of focus that it can take advantage of the swirl or the curved field. So, and that can be seen with the modern lomography Petzval. That can be seen in the viewfinder of the SLR camera. You can actually look and focus in and out, and you can see where the most swirl, and then you can figure out exactly where to put your subject. So you pick your background, get your swirl, and then find your subject in relation to that background for the sharpness of the subject, and that's a good way to use it. You can also stop down the Petzval, and it can be a perfectly sharp lens if you want that. So the Petzval lens has all these different elements that are going on. It's fast, it has shallow depth of field. When you shoot it wide open, you not only are getting the curved field, but you're also getting the shallow depth of field, which creates beautiful fall off. So if you're doing portraiture, for instance, you're not particularly interested in swirl, but you're interested in a beautiful modeling or sculptured effect, you're going to use the Petzval for that at very wide open, f3.8, around f4, for the Petzvals of the day, which are somewhere 8 inches or about 203 millimeters or longer, is incredibly shallow depth of field, incredibly fast for a lens that long. So you would get this beautiful fall off where the eyes would be in focus, and the nose or the ears would be out of focus, and the curved field would be creating this wonderful modeling and sculpturing. And that has nothing really there's something to do with the curved field, nothing to do with swirly bokeh, but a lot to do with the shallow depth of field that the Petzval would offer. And at the same time, the center of the lens, especially when you focus on the eyes, is incredibly sharp. So it's that interplay between soft and sharp and curved field and fall off that creates a beautiful, expressive, sculptured portrait. And that's another aspect of the Petzval lens that's very effective and very important to note. I got a barrage of emails from friends who saw the Kickstarter campaign by Lomography, and I immediately went to it, and I thought, what a wonderful thing. And I was really quite surprised. I remember the excitement when you saw the target amount that they were trying to raise, and then every day the amount was going up and up and up and up. That was very exciting for me, because here's something I've been excited about for many, many years, sort of in a vacuum. You know, there are a few of us that are interested in Petzval lenses who do alternative photography, 19th century photography, and we know and love what a Petzval is. So I was really quite surprised that there were so many people who were willing to support it, who were interested in this type of photography and this type of lens. So I think it was a very exciting time, especially not just for the lens and not just for lomography, not just for Petzval, but also for the Penumbra Foundation, for what we're trying to do for alternative photographic processes, for the history of photography. So I think it was a seminal moment where many things came together in that campaign that showed more and more of an interest in photography, or traditional photography as we think of it, in contrast to digital photography. I've been trying, and many have been trying, to get a Petzval lens onto a digital camera, especially a Canon 5D, something with a full frame. The idea is you want a larger format as possible, because you want to exploit or use the out of focus area and the complete field of the Petzval lens. There are two problems that we've encountered in trying to get Petzval lenses on the digital cameras, is that most, or 99% of most Petzval lenses were made for much larger formats. in the 19th century, there was not a 35mm format camera. There were some small Petzvals that were for gem tubes, but they were not in focusing mount. They were longer than you would want them to be, because the longer the lens, the greater the focal length, the more coverage. So the idea of how are we going to get a Petzval lens onto a digital back or even a 35mm film back, and these lenses simply were just too long. And you can get them on there, you can extend them out beyond, but then you're really just using the center, sharp center of the lens, which is not the purpose of using a Petzval. So when I heard about the lomography Petzval, I was very excited, because here is a company that's coming along that is formulating the lens specifically for a full frame format. And will give that swirly bokeh and the different optical effects and expression by design. And we'll have the mount on it that will easily be able to mount on to a modern digital camera. For us, that's very exciting, because that means we can use the digital format, the digital technology, to create very high quality, high-res files that we can then turn into digital negatives and use them for the different printing out processes. So for us, it was a very exciting thing to hear that somebody had sort of the insight and the vision to look backwards in time to create a technology that works perfectly with the technology that exists today. So I applaud lomography for having that vision.